Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm away for a few days in Suffolk, and unfortunately I haven't got any astro gear with me, just my EOS R and a camera lens with the tripod. So I say I've got no astro gear with me. You can actually do astro with some simple kit like this, and I thought what a great opportunity to do a short video just to show you that you can get into astrophotography with basic equipment, and you don't need to go down the deep rabbit hole, the one I've definitely fallen down, and buying loads and loads of expensive equipment. So stick around, I'll share some tips with you, show you what I do, and hopefully it can help you get into the hobby too. My name's Glenn and you're watching Astrobloke. So hi, astrophotography, any of you that have looked into this know that it can be an extremely expensive hobby. When I started I did just have a DSLR and used to just take pictures of the night sky, mainly concentrating on things like time lapses. I really enjoy doing them. I used to do daytime ones too, but the nighttime ones I really enjoyed because I love watching the movement of the stars. I'm in a Bortle 4 zone here, so the sky is quite nice, and typically, even though it's not clear now, the nights are due to be clear. You can guarantee that if I'd have bought my telescope it'd have been cloudy every night, but that's just the way it goes. Anyway, I've got a Canon EOS R mirrorless camera, which is full frame. It's a really lovely camera. It's not the RA version, so it hasn't been modified for astrophotography, and I don't have any filters with me. When I first started photographing the night sky, and my very first astro photography image that really got me into this hobby of the Milky Way, which I took in Spain, that was taken with a really small compact Canon M3, and great little camera, and I had it on a small tripod about this high on the ground. You can even see all the grass in front, and I took, well, I was going to do a time lapse, but I took about 20 images of the Milky Way. I didn't have enough for a time lapse. We ran out of time and had to leave. So what I did was I stacked the images together. I'll show you it here. And this really got me into astrophotography. I was amazed, and of course learning about stacking was what taught me about deep sky imaging, and then that was it. I was hooked down the rabbit hole and away I went. Now obviously there's a limitation if you haven't got a tracking mount and telescopes and cooled cameras and etc etc. These things all help make your images better, but you can still take amazing images with just a normal camera and lens. So let's just talk over a couple of tips that you need to know. Firstly, you want to be able to put your camera into manual mode, so you want to turn off all the automations. So we don't want any stabilization, we don't want any autofocusing. We just turn everything off and it's purely manual. We want to have full control over the camera. When we are taking our images, depending on what we want to take, we can use whatever lenses we've got. A kit lens is absolutely fine. Again, you can be dragged down the road of buying all different types of lenses, which can be quite expensive in the long run. One of the big reasons why people buy different lenses isn't just for the different fields of view, wide field, etc., but it's also for the speed of the lens, so the f-stop. And obviously the lower that f-stop, the faster that lens is. Now the faster it is, the better it is at gathering light, and the better it is at gathering light, the more information you're going to capture at night time. A really good lens, which isn't expensive, is known as the Nifty 50, which is a 50mm lens that fits on the Canon. I do know that you can use these on other cameras. You just get the adapters for them, so you can put them on a Sony, etc. These are not expensive, so I think new they're about 100, 120 pounds. I think on Amazon at the moment they're 119 pounds. So we're looking at a lens that is not overly expensive and it's nice and fast. This is actually f1.8. The camera lens I've got on here is a Samyang 14mm. Now this was a little bit more expensive and it's fully manual, only goes down to f2.8, but the 14mm is a lovely big wide shot of the sky, so you can get a lot of the Milky Way and other things in that shot. But as I say, you don't have to even buy a separate lens. You could just stay with the kit lens your camera come with. That's absolutely fine. So once you've got your camera, you're in manual, you've got to look at a few settings. So once you've got your lens in place, and one of the advantages of a wider field lens, so a lower focal length like 14mm, is one of the things you need to know about is star trails. So if you haven't got a tracking mount, you're just using a tripod, what will happen is if you image for too long on a target, you'll get the stars won't be points, they'll be streaks, and then of course that can be an effect that you're going after. Some people do that, they do pictures of star trails. But if you want points and you're just looking to do like a time lapse of the stars moving in the sky or a nice still image, you are going to need to restrict how long your exposure is so that you don't end up with star trails. Now you may have heard of the 500 rule, and what that means is you take 500 and divide it by the focal length of the lens you're using. So if for instance we've got this 50mm, 500 divided by 50 is 10. So you would be 10 seconds as the longest exposure you could take before you get star trails. Now that's very basic, and that would be on a full frame camera. So if you was on, say, a smaller Canon which had an APS-C size sensor, there's a crop factor involved of 1.6. So you would then have to divide the 10 by 1.6, which would give you just over 6 seconds. So 6 seconds would be the longest exposure you could do with an APS-C. But with full frame you could get 10 seconds. Now I like to err on the side of caution, and a lot of people to really not have any star trails at all, they say the 400 rule is better. So for me with this lens it would be 8 seconds maximum. With this lens at 14mm I can get almost 30 seconds. I think it's something like 28 seconds if I divide it into 400. So a much longer exposure that I can get. I normally only take that to about 15 to 20 seconds. So the length of the exposure allows you to drop one of the other settings down in your camera, which is the ISO setting. Now all that does is multiply the signal that you get into the camera. And of course if you're shooting in the dark, the ISO higher, the image will be a lot brighter. But what you have to be careful of is it can also amplify the noise, which is the grainy effect you get on your images. So you need to keep an eye on that. What I like to do is to try and push the exposure as long as possible and keep the ISO as low as possible. This is a really good camera, however, it doesn't really produce much noise. The older Canons, the noise would be a little bit more prominent, but you would have to experiment. I normally like to keep this around the sort of 800 to 1600. Gives me a really nice image without any graininess, and if I can take it lower I will. It just depends on the sky conditions. So what we're looking at balancing up there is we've got the lens speed, which is the f-stop. Now sometimes having it fully open you don't get the cleanest of image. Maybe taking it one step down off of the 2.8 and on this from say 1.8 to 2.2, that could, or I think it's f2, that could actually sharpen up the image a little bit more. Again, it's really camera and lens dependent, and it's something you just have to take a test shot and see if you like it. But what I normally do is I have it fully open, I'll push the exposure to as long as I can before star trails start, and then I adjust the ISO till I get what I think is a nice balance. You don't want it too bright, but you don't want it too dark. You want to be able to see those stars. Once you've got those kind of set in your mind, you're ready to sort of do your imaging or your time lapse, and you've got a couple of routes that you can go down. So As I say, time lapse is one of my favourites. This camera's got a great feature built into it where it's actually got a video time lapse. So what it'll do is you put in all the parameters of your time lapse, it'll do the time lapse, taking all the single images, but then automatically stitch it together for you into a video, so you don't even have to do all of that in post-processing, which is a really lovely feature. Obviously you can then just do a still image of something. I've just done single shots of the sky that have come out quite nice, especially if you've got an interest in the foreground, say like an old ruin or a landscape or a lake or whatever it is you can kind of imagine. You can get some really stunning shots. So I'm sure one of your questions would be, you know, exactly what gear do I need? And you don't need very much. As I would say, a tripod is kind of essential. You really do need your camera to be totally still when it's taking the image, otherwise you will end up with movement and that will just blur the stars. So I would say a tripod is essential. Beyond that, you could just use the kit lens. You don't need to have any special lenses. You don't even need a remote shutter. Now, I would suggest that that's a good addition if you have got one or you can afford to get one, because you're not then touching the camera, which again, you won't cause any shake. But you don't need one. A lot of cameras come with a delay timer, so you can have like a 2-second or 10-second delay before it takes a shot, which allows you to push the button, leave it alone, it'll all settle and then take its image. So there's ways around things. Like I say, everything you add is a cost. One thing especially that I am going to suffer with when I'm imaging tonight is I haven't brought with me a dew tape. So I've got some small ones that plug into a USB, plug into a power supply, just put a bit of heat around where the lens is, and that stops any dew forming. Haven't brought them with me, so I'm going to have to be aware of that dew could form, especially if I'm doing a time lapse over 2-3 hours. If the dew forms, it's going to mist up and it will affect the images. So that's something you need to bear in mind, that you might want to add to your kit to get the best results, but totally not essential. So the final challenge that you'll have is focus, and that can be quite tricky. A lot of lenses have what they call infinity marked on them when you're focusing. This one doesn't. This one does. It's got an infinity mark on it, but that's not necessarily accurate. You've got two choices. In the daytime, you could find a target that's right in the distance, focus in as sharp as you can, and then maybe use a little bit of tape to lock the focus in position, and try your best not to knock it in till the evening. However, temperature changes could affect that a little bit. Or if you've got a light source a long way away, like a street light or something that you can focus on at night time, that could be better. But most of the time what I do is I zoom up to ×10 on the screen and I just keep focusing until I get the star the smallest it can be. I take a few test shots, it might need a few adjustments, but I normally get it close enough, and that's the way that I do the focusing. You could go further and buy things like a batten off mask, which would help you with the focusing, but I've never really felt that's necessary for the kind of wide field shots that I'm taking. Right, so I'm going to pack all this away, and then next time you'll see me, hopefully it'll be dark, and even more hopefully it'll be clear, and we can take some images and just have a little bit of fun with the DSLR, and we can show you what it can do. Right, I'll see you later. On here I've got the 1.8 f1.8 50mm, the nifty 50 from Canon. So what I'm going to do, I'm just looking up there, I've got a star up there I'm going to focus on, and there's a little bit of cloud, and it's going to be cloudy with a bit of clearness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the camera up, go through some settings with you in case this is something you want to do, and I'm actually just going to set up a time lapse. So anyway, what we'll do, we'll have a look at the settings on the camera, and we'll have a look at what sort of astrophotography we can take with just our DSLR and a normal lens. Right, let's have a look. Okay, so we've got a caravan there, which isn't too interesting, but we've got some trees there. I'm not going to be with the camera, so I want to put it somewhere where it's safe. So let's have a look at this. I can actually see the star on the screen. There it is. So that's pretty cool. Now the first thing I've got to do is make sure that nothing is on auto. So we just need to make sure that autofocus and any stabilisation is turned off, so we're all in manual. So I just turn a lot on here. On different cameras we've got different things, but on the Nifty 50 you've got the auto turned off there, so that's good. And there's no other switches on there for automatic, so that's good. Right, I'm just going to turn this light off. And we've actually got a star on the back screen here. You can see that there. And what I'm going to do is, that's on ×5 at the moment, so I'm going to make it ×10. Get it up. And what we've got to do is make it, that's it large, make it right to the point where it is the smallest point it can be. That's good. Now, just going to check what mode my camera's in. I'm going to put it in manual. Now have a look at some settings, so we can see there. We're going to go right down to f1.8. We'll put the ISO down to say 800. It's a bit high at the moment because it's quite a bit of sky glow. We've got 8 seconds. There we go. And what we'll do, I want to just bring that up a little bit so we're getting away from that top of that caravan. I may actually rotate this a bit. We've got a tree there, and a few trees there. That could make it a bit more interesting. Right, let's take a test shot. Got to wait 8 seconds, sorry, I'm not going to forward the video. Ping! So it's quite bright, but the stars look a bit, well, looking at them, they look a little bit blurry. So what I'm going to do, and this I would say does need doing sometimes, I'm going to look through the viewfinder, because sometimes you can see it's a bit easier to focus through the viewfinder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back on that very bright star, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through the viewfinder this time. I'm just going to take another test shot, see what comes back. What I'm hoping is when we start the pictures, the sky's going to be brightish, and then as the night comes in, it's going to get darker and darker, and more stars are going to reveal themselves. Oh, that looks much better. What I'm going to do now, and this is very simple with this one, we're actually going to go to the video settings and we're going to go manual. We was at ISO 800. I'm actually going to try 400, 1.8, and whoops, I actually need to, please bear with me, I need to actually go to the menu before and turn the time lapse on. Now there's two choices. I've got 4K or high definition. I'm actually going to go 4K because I've got a nice big card in there. We want a nice bit of movement, so we're going to go for 10-second intervals. 5 seconds quite nice, but 10 seconds gives a nice fast one. So it's going to run for 3 hours 19 minutes and give me a 48-second time lapse. So that'd be quite good. And we can obviously extend the time on that if we want to, so I'm quite happy with that. So we go back to the camera and we want 8 seconds, and then we want ISO 400 at 1.8. Let's take a test shot. These lights, someone turn the light off, which is handy. These test shots are always good and give us a good idea of what we've got. There's a little bit of haze up there. I like that. That looks really good, actually. I like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to just push record, and then it says press start to start it, and that is starting a time lapse. So this is my Samyang 14mm 2.8. I think in the United States you pick these up as Rokinon. Great lens actually, nice and fast, nice and wide, so we can get some good images. It's just because on the EOS it has to go on an adapter because it only takes RF lenses. I'm wondering how much time I'm going to get outside with this great big lump of glass at the front. If you've not seen it, it's quite a bulb of glass there, and I'm sure that's going to attract the dew really nicely. Okay, what we'll do, we'll go outside and just take a few long exposure pictures. So let's go back outside and see what we can do. We've got our camera. We're going to go back to, we're going to come off of video. We'll go back to manual exposure. We've got a lovely wide field shot there. We'll just bring that up like that. Now this is a manual lens, so I don't need to worry about any autofocus or anything. All I need to do is look at the focus. I would say about there looks good. We got ISO 800, 8 seconds. So we've got a 14mm lens, so we're going to be able to push the time up quite a bit. In fact, we could mostly go something around the region of, let's go 15 seconds. That's way under what it will need, which means we can drop that ISO down to say 400. Right, I'm going to turn this light off out here and we'll do a little test shot. Okay, and then we'll give this a little. So you'll notice how I had a little delay timer on, and that was so that we get rid of any camera shake. And if I don't move about now, this should hopefully take a nice picture. I actually can see Pleiades up there, but we're at such a wide field. I'll zoom this in. There, on the back screen, is Pleiades, which looks quite nice. I'm just going to have a look through the viewfinder